So there's one big gaping flaw with the West in regards to just being better than the East, which is infrastructure. Now, in the past, we had talked about infrastructure before, and I'm talking about 2014, 2015, 2016 era. And at that time, that was where North America infrastructure, or the EU LCS infrastructure, well, I guess LEC, right, as we call it, infrastructure was poor because it didn't have any, teaming, gaming houses, and we were just getting into that system, and we were just getting into coaches and what that whole thing was about. But I think really what's going on and why the West lags behind the East is actually still due to infrastructure. And I think it's a misunderstanding of how important infrastructure actually is. And we can see this through the firing of coaches during middle of the splits. And I think coaches currently do not get long enough contracts to build systems in North America or in the European, LCS or LEC, I guess, which is why we don't see progress from the West. So, first of all, who am I? Well, I noticed that I don't ever explain this in any of my videos, so I think I'll do it for this one. I am an analytical writer and interviewer in the League of Legends pro scene. I've been in it since about 2017, and I've been watching pro play since season 2. Hence why I keep saying that the LEC is the EU LCS. Old habits die hard. But I want to get into the kind of, I guess it's past news. It's a little bit old, but it's still quite relevant, of that the firing of Yamato Cannon and getting removed from Carmine Corp after only 3 weeks of being with the team, which by my estimation and my memory of like all the coaches and all the teams throughout, the entire history of the game, I can't remember a coach actually getting fired for performance-based issues rather than behavioral issues in like the span of 3 weeks. That's something completely unheard of. And it's clear that they have preemptively kind of done this, or I guess done this as a trigger pull and kind of rushed things for some reason. And I can't for the life of me figure out why, if it were just based off of performance issues. I think that is the completely most wild story ever. And obviously I'm not saying I don't believe it, but it shows the ridiculousness and the short-sightedness of Western teams and Western organizations when it comes to actual coaching and infrastructure, and how it's somehow fucking secondary to the entire idea of owning an organization to begin with. Then we also have the news that was overshadowed quite heavily, which was Sharks being removed from Immortals, and he had just joined the team as the coach for 2024 season. Which is insane to cut a coach after only one split and not giving him a second split to finish out the entire year and finish out at least part of his vision for the organization itself, which is why this is an entire problem within the West. Now, of course, a lot of people might initially be thinking of Mithy as well. I think his situation was a bit different on Cloud9. He was on Cloud9 from 2020 to 2021. And then, he did some like analyst work for 100 Thieves. And then he was back on Cloud9 for 2023. And so that's a different situation because he's been with the organization for quite a long time. So it's kind of still weird to get rid of him in the middle of the split. But I can at least see that logic, and it somewhat makes sense because they know, he's a known quantity, I guess. But the point in why it's such a huge problem to kick a coach in the middle of a split, especially, right, or in the middle in between splits, especially, let alone, a year at least to let the guy finish it out, is because it reminds me of a substitute teacher. You know how like in high school you get a substitute teacher and he doesn't really know what the fuck is going on in the classroom, and so he puts on like Band of Brothers or something and he doesn't really teach you anything, so he's just kind of sitting there and you're like, great, this is awesome because we get to watch Band of Brothers. Actually, I don't even know if they still watch that. They fucking should, because it's a really good historical show that teaches you, in fact, a lot about history and about World War II. But Yeah, so they would just kind of sit there and they wouldn't really get your respect either as a classroom or, as kids in high school. You would kind of clown around and you knew you could get away with certain things because the teacher didn't know you, so you could start talking with your friends or whatever, or play video games in the classroom if it were like a computer classroom, right? Because like the teacher doesn't really know. He might not even be a computer savvy teacher. He might not know that you can fucking alt tab from programs, not by clicking the mouse but by using the keyboard, like random shit like that. But point is that substitute teachers never got any respect. And I assume they don't get any respect nowadays as a kid as well. So just imagine that same situation in League of Legends or in esports. A substitute coach is not going to get any respect when he jumps into an organization and is expected to like patch all these holes. He doesn't know any of the personality of the players, let alone he probably doesn't even know the play style of the players. And just imagine that you as a viewer or you as someone from the outside perspective, even if you are an insider within esports, you don't get to see the scrims of these players. So you're only seeing like maybe 20%, 10% of the games ever because you only see their stage games. So yeah, a little bit of their play style and their personality and stuff like that through the game and through interviews, but you can only gather so much when you don't know the inside or, the infrastructure within the team. So now this coach is going in there blind and you expect them to like make shit work. So I want to compare this to the East and how it's been significantly different, and we've taken completely different paths as far as building out infrastructure. And Western teams seem to think that they have infrastructure of some sort when really they fucking don't, and it's clear that they don't by how frequent that they fire their coaches. So for instance, Mafa, legendary coach. Now notice I didn't say Mata, Mafa. So Mafa is, if you don't know, he coached Invictus Gaming for 5 years from 2014 to 2019. And he, of course, won Worlds in 2018. And then he also coached Gen G from season 12 to season 13 from 2022 to 2023. So 2 years. And he now currently coaches JDG for 2024. This guy is a legend, and he's clearly stayed with teams for at least 2 years, and he's been able to build up infrastructure and build up systems. Tabe, another legendary coach, Coach RNG from 2020 to 2023. So 4 years? This guy is a fucking legend in the LPL. And if you don't know, I think Travis Gafford did an interview with him like in the last Worlds or something, and he speaks phenomenal English. He actually used to be a kind of connection to the East as far as learning about, different Eastern regions. I think he was even in the LMS and stuff like that. But yeah, he speaks fantastic English, and he has a really bright mind for the game. He's actually one of the few coaches that we can point towards because he speaks fluent English, and we can actually learn the mindset of what is, the LPL. Great coach. Maokai, once again, coach EDG from 2023 or 2020 to 2023. So he's coached EDG for 4 years. Once again, another legendary coach in the entire scene. You have Zepha, coach Damwon Gaming from 2020 to now with, I think there was a gap in 2021 where he was with T1. But he's a world champion from Damwon Gaming, winning Worlds in 2020. CV Max is another coach. Coach Griffin from 2017 to 2019. Then he coached DRX from 2020 to 2021. And if you don't know, Griffin was basically like the legendary Rocks Tigers back in the day, right? You always heard about the Rocks Tigers and how they were such an awesome team, and they were like a ragtag bunch of players that had great and phenomenal synergy, and they were somehow better than the sum of their parts, but they were still great parts individually of themselves. That was the modern age of what Rocks Tiger was with Griffin. Griffin was exactly the same type of team and type of feel. You have Coach Edgar, who previously won Worlds for 2014 with Samsung White. And then he got second in 2016 Worlds. And then he won 2017 Worlds with Samsung Galaxy. Now he's coaching Breon, and he has been since 2020. So as you can see, all of these coaches, and they're all legendary, yes, but the point is that they've all been with their teams or their organizations for at least a minimum of 2 years. I mean, Mafa, stayed on Invictus Gaming for 5 years. I don't think there's a coach in the entire Western League of Legends that has ever stayed with an organization for 5 years. That's completely unheard of. Those are unheard of numbers. And why do you think the East has such good fundamentals about the game and understandings about the game? It's because they have the same consistent coaching staff. They can actually build like a curriculum of what it is to play League of Legends and theories and axioms about the game. You know, just like a teacher versus a substitute teacher. A substitute teacher doesn't have a curriculum. They're just going in there for the day or for the week because, you know, the teacher is sick or something and they can't actually go to work. So of course that teacher isn't going to have a curriculum and be able to build out a plan. But clearly people like Mafa, people like Zepha can actually build a curriculum and have a cohesive plan in order to teach these kids or teach these players, right? And I think another underrated thing about having a consistent coaching staff and why the East does better than the West as far as results every time that we go to international competition, as far as, you know, MSI or Worlds, is because just look at all of their lineups. A lot of their lineups usually make a lot of sense. There's a lot of cohesion, and there really aren't any blunders as far as personalities or clashes or anything, as, you know, as limited as we can tell from a Western perspective. Obviously, we don't fucking speak the language and can watch all the streams, or they aren't as forthcoming in interviews, obviously. But they seem to have great ideas about even just blending play styles together. And I think that's because there's great relationships between the head coach and the GM. They've had time to actually mesh because they aren't, you know, fucking mercenaries going from team to team and switching constantly. They can actually build philosophies about the game and understand what types of players maybe that the coach actually likes, what type of budget, you know, that the organization is actually working with, and the GM can actually start to share that and start to share insider knowledge rather than trying to hold it all to his chest because he doesn't actually know if the coach is going to be here for another fucking year, right? That's how it is in the East. So, you know, building a trust and building relationship within the organization, that can actually happen in the East because you're not there for just a year or just for 2 years. You're actually embedded within the organization and you can understand the philosophy of actually building a roster. And if you notice in the West, it's most of the time a coach will come into the team, right, at the very beginning of the year, and maybe the GM has already been planning exactly, you know, who to grab or what players to grab as far as their entire lineup. And maybe they've already thought of, you know, these different iterations of how many players that they can afford, what salaries that they can afford. So they've already kind of decided what roster or, you know, what kind of lineup that they want without any input from the actual head coach. You know, and this has been a little bit rectified, which is due for at least give some credit to Riot in the fact that coaches are released a little bit earlier as far as their contract rather than players after, like, it's like a day after Worlds, I think is the technical thing. So at least that has been rectified a little bit so that coaches can at least have a fighting chance of having a say on what their lineup is to some degree, but they don't have full autonomy over that. Versus over in the East, you can obviously see that the head coaches have way more input about the lineup that they actually get, and they can collaborate with the GM, but you don't have a fighting chance with that in the West. And I think really fundamentally the problem with having coaches that go in and out of organizations so often is that you don't really get to build a connection with your players. And that's the biggest problem within an organization, because how do you expect them to win anything if they don't have a relationship with each other? And I know the whole meme of like friendship and shit has always been there of like, well, no, these players just need to play better. No, actually, I think players do play better when they've gone through a little bit of hardship and a little bit of action. Like, if you know anything about the psychology of men, is that we build bonds way better when we go through hardships, when we go through war, when we go through action with our buddies, right? The term, I have a couple of friends in the military. There's a term called battle buddy, and it's the guy that has your back, because he's your fucking battle buddy, right? It's kind of a joke, I guess, too. But the point is that you have gone through like basic training. You've gone through all this different shit. You've gone through thick and thin with your unit itself. Like, those guys have a bond for life, because they've been through hardship. They've been through similar situations. And that's how, the military builds such good bonds with, individuals and individual soldiers together. I can even reference like my own life, for instance. I'll give you a little anecdote, a little peek behind the curtain. I used to do street racing back in the day, and I used to race in Washington State. And so there was this big mountain, think fucking Initial D, like literally a scene out of Initial D. I would do toge on Mount Rainier, which is like this famous mountain over in Washington State. And I met this guy on the mountain, and he's like, hey, want to race? I'm like, yeah, sure. And he kicked my ass, and one of the best drivers that I've seen to this day, in fact. And I consider myself a pretty good driver. But point is that we built a relationship from that, and he helped me build an engine. He helped me tear out my old engine, put in a new one, and learn cars together. And we now have this relationship forever. That's something that we went through as far as action and bonding and hardship and, blood, sweat, and tears, literally through cutting myself on the cars and shit as we're working on it. Like, that's something that you can't replace. And that's something that I think men particularly need to have, is you need to have hardship in order to build a strong bond with a person, because we don't really talk to each other that much. We talk to each other if we're doing something together. Yes, like there's like this famous thing over in Australia or some shit, or I think it's the UK, where it's like it's like a help group or whatever, like a psychology help group, where men build sheds together, and it's like older men just building sheds together. But the point is not obviously to build the shed, but it's to have something to do while you talk about your problems, and you talk about your life or whatever, or your wife is kind of pissing you off and you're having marriage problems or whatever the fuck. But the point is that men oftentimes need a vehicle in order to build a bond with each other and kind of get close and resolve issues and resolve bigger problems. But you can't have that if you're the new guy and you're just building out a team. That doesn't happen overnight. Trust doesn't happen overnight when it comes to relationships with guys. Now, this is also why I think macro fundamentals are better in the East than they are in the West, is because, like I said, you have a curriculum that's been built from, day one or years before, from the coaching staff that has been there consistently throughout years. He's able to build a curriculum and say, these are the things that actually matter within the game. And this is how I know how to teach the game. You don't get that thing overnight. And it's kind of weird, because if you look at, I guess, the perspective of the organization, right? If you're an owner for a team, you can look at this and say, oh, well, like, what's in it for me for keeping a coach, especially if he's shitty within the first 6 months, call it halfway in between the split or whatnot. Well, think about the players. Players themselves, they aren't constant, right? Which is why they always say that branding is weak for teams. Branding is weak for teams because fans follow players. But the main big reason of why fans would only want to follow players is because, dude, you don't have a brand with your team. You don't have any particular hinging piece that people can cling on to say, oh, this is my team because of this guy or this guy, because they're all flipping, they're all going in and out like a revolving door. And the one thing that you could have done is you could have had a coaching staff that could stay there and consistently build a team identity over and over again and build a pipeline to, actually build a fan base. And you would think this would have happened with franchising. Like, franchising should have meant, at the very least, a consistent coaching staff so that you can build a vision out for your organization. Because let's face it, if your goal is, as a business, and as all businesses should have a goal, which is to get fucking money and to make a profit, you can't really do that if your business plan changes from year to year to year and you don't have a consistent goal that you're trying to reach towards. So you would have thought franchising would have helped that. And cynically, even if you're the most cynical team owner and saying that coaches don't mean shit, at least you could have thought of that it would have helped your branding and helped your identity as a team to where people stick on as fans and you actually retain fan bases from year to year to year, right? Currently, we don't really have that. And I think one of the biggest things of joining a new team as a new head coach is obviously alluding to IRL workplace stuff. Because if you don't know, and this is how I know that esports itself doesn't have any IRL experience, any of these motherfuckers in the higher executive positions within these organizations, they're all from esports. They all really don't know about real life IRL, pleb job shit. Is that when you join a new workplace, and currently I have a pleb job as well too in senior position, is that whenever someone in senior position comes into the company, they chill, right? They ease back and they're just like, okay, I'm in this new organization or I'm in this way new higher position. I need to take a step back and consider, okay, what are the moves here? How is the system actually, already flowing and already working? And how do I fix this or, help this organization be better? So that's what a good executive does when they come into a higher position, because really you don't have any buy-in, even if you're an executive and you're in charge of people down below you. That doesn't mean that you have any buy-in, and you also don't know as much as the people below you currently, right? Because they have more experience. And really, there is no replacement for experience. I know a lot of people think that, when you get out of college or something, you have some degree of experience that tells people, oh, hey, I have a bachelor's in computer science. That means I know about computer programming or whatnot. It's like, no, really, when you get into the real workforce and you get a job in computer programming, or you get a job into plumbing, or, you're a lawyer or something and you get your first job, you don't know shit. And it's basically like you can throw all of that shit out the window. And really all that college degree is, for the most part, is it shows your capacity to learn, and it shows your ability to stick with one thing and actually pinpoint your skills and say that, okay, I'm someone that's actually committed to something. That's really what a degree shows. So joining a new workplace, you are at kind of a lower part of the totem pole, even if you're in a senior position. And I can just tell that these fucking people in esports don't have any comparison to IRL situations like that, which is why they don't value these coaches being in a higher position for a long amount of time. And the one big example that I can point towards is obviously TSM, formerly, I guess, now back in the day. And the fact that that team constantly went through coaches over and over. And the problem with that is obviously that you aren't going to have buy-in from any of the players. And especially you aren't going to have buy-in from a player like Bjergsen. Why do you think Bjergsen went through so many fucking coaches? It's because he's not going to be able to buy into a coach that just came onto the team and has no tenure. It's like him stepping into the fucking house with his shoes on. It's like, dude, this is my house. Take your fucking shoes off before you come in, right? So how is anyone going to get buy-in from Bjergsen, and especially not only from a player that has so much tenure on that specific team, but is also a star player? That's your worst nightmare as a coach. You're never going to get buy-in from that guy, right? So TSM specifically kept rotating out coaches and didn't get any coach to have tenure. And I think really one of the longest coaches that I can remember that stayed on TSM was Loco Doco back all those years. I think he stayed on TSM for, I want to say, a year and a half or 2 years. That's like the longest coach ever, which is very sad for TSM as an organization. And when you have coaches that get in that position like that, and they know that their time within an organization is pretty finite, is that they start patching the ship. They start JB welding the fucking boards of the ship, and instead of replacing the boards and replacing the rot itself. And so they're constantly trying to scoop out water from the ship rather than repair it. And that's why you have maybe these situations to where, yes, maybe you'll be able to win a split. Maybe you'll be able to win 2 splits. But it's not something that you can consistently keep on doing because you're patching problems with a temporary solution and you aren't able to actually build an entire curriculum. And here's the point that I want to get towards, which is that Kometo and KC, right, Carmine Corp, are just like Reginald. When you look at this, and this is going down a very dark road, and I think here's the warning that I'll give to Kometo, in fact. Don't go down the same path that TSM went down. Don't go down the path of selling your coaches out and making sure that there's no possible way that they can get buy-in. Because now you have, a legendary name, or you have tenured players, franchise players that you want to keep. And then now you don't have a coach to go with it. And so there's really no authority on the team. And really, it's just going to be a team led by the players rather than the coaching staff or the organization themselves. Don't do that, because that's going to be a grave mistake and you're setting yourself up for failure, right? For example, Peter Dunn, for instance, because we have some of these good examples within the West, I think. Peter Dunn was with EG for 2 years. What did he do from 2021 to 2022? For 2 years, he was able to set up an entire system, and that was quite quick. I think he's one of the big exceptions to be able to do this so fast. But, of course, he had Jizuke, and he had these stopgaps of players to where, yes, they were very one-dimensional. His team played around Jizuke a lot. They were a very erratic team, which is why that style is not something that you can stay with consistently. So, Peter Dunn said, okay, I want an out from this. I want an out from this playstyle because clearly it's not going to be consistent at all. And he was able to scout rookies and build up his coaching staff and his infrastructure and be able to have an escape if he needed one, which he clearly did need one towards the end of that entire roster. So, of course, he got, the likes of Jojo Pyun, and he got Danny and whatnot. Dylan Falco from 2022 to now, 3 years with G2. He's clearly been able to build up a system in G2 and make it a consistent thing. But you don't build, that type of trust with an entire roster overnight. That just doesn't happen. Any coach is not able to do that. And yes, sure, I'm not trying to detract anything from Dylan Falco as a coach and his abilities, but surely tenureship actually matters when it comes to, being able to get buy-in from players, and especially star players like someone like a Caps or someone like a Yankos, right? Daylor, let's go back, right? From 2015 to 2016, I always thought he was a phenomenal coach for Fnatic. He coached Fnatic for 2 years. He was able to actually get buy-in at the end of the time from, his entire lineup and his players. And of course, back in those days, players were even more flippant and they were swapping teams constantly in and out. But he was able to actually build a system and get buy-in from his players. So I want to bring this all back, right? I want to tie it all back to the East. And there's one specific example that I think is the pinnacle example of a organization buying into a coach, which is I Love Uv. So if you don't know I Love Uv, he was a legendary StarCraft player back in the day. I think he was even considered a bourgeois, right? So if you guys don't know, a bourgeois is like the legendary of legendary players. And the term originally came from StarCraft, and he's in the likes in the echelon of Flash and Boxer. And currently in League of Legends, you would consider Faker a bourgeois as well. So he's in the category of fucking Faker, right? And I'm forgetting, I think, the fourth bourgeois of StarCraft. I'll probably get flamed for not remembering. I think it's some guy named Zerg, I want to say, right? Anyways, point is, he coached a Freak of Freaks from 2017 to 2020. And this team was known to be fucking grind lords. Just massive scrim blocks every fucking day. Like 3 scrim blocks, 4 scrim blocks a day. Just impossible numbers that, you could ever live up to. And he was known as a player for having crazy grind lord kind of philosophy about StarCraft. And so he brought that over into League of Legends. And there's a great piece. I recommend everyone to read this piece, and it's still relevant and still good, from Fion over from ESPN back in the day. He did a piece on a Freak of Freaks and the scrim culture and just team culture of what I Love Uv had been able to create for his team. And this, I think, was over in 2019 maybe, or 2020. He went to go visit the Freak of Freaks team house, and he was just astonished at how much they practiced and how much they were staying up, and they really didn't get any sleep, and they were constantly playing the game. And it's because I Love Uv has been there for so long, and he's a legendary name as well too. He's a fucking bourgeois, so of course you're going to listen to the guy. But he was able to build a culture. That's something that you can't do overnight. That's not something that a coach can just come in and interject themselves and say, okay, these are the fucking rules now. Like, no, you don't get to do that. But if you're there for a long time, anytime a player comes in, you get to tell them to take off their fucking shoes. They're in your house, right? And people in the West seem to have this weird idea that tenureship or age doesn't matter within the West, right? Like, everyone respects age in the East, and of course tenureship and age actually matter and actually do something in the East. But in all reality, it still does shit in the West. What, you don't think that someone, within, like I said, an IRL company that's been there for a while and a new executive comes in, you don't think that he has some large amount of respect from that senior executive? Of course he does. He's been there for years. He's been there before the senior executive even got to the company. Of course he's going to have respect from the senior executive, and maybe advise him on certain things about, the company. Maybe he's even just a fucking custodian, but he's been there for 10 years and he knows a specific like store location or something, and he knows all the nooks and crannies and stuff. You aren't going to be able to figure that out as a executive. Even if you run the entire store, you're not going to be able to figure that out overnight. So of course you have to respect this guy. Right? It's setting culture, and it's being able to set culture through years that you've put in, and to show everybody, because it's something somewhat tangible that you can show people. You can say, this is how much that I have on the line. And I think that's the major failing of the West, and why we have all these teams that seem to just forget things overnight, and we restart fundamentals for macro and fundamentals for laning phase and fundamentals for objective taking and things like that, because coaches are not able to set up infrastructure to carry over things from year to year to year, and they have to keep learning things and keep patching holes, which is why I don't think the West has a chance in terms of fighting against the East, because they have to constantly keep restarting the game.